What you are looking at is a 1976 RCA XL100 control center, also known as a direct address television set. And the reason it's called a direct address set is that you can actually key in the channel, the exact channel that you would like to watch directly into the remote. This was one of the first television sets that had the ability to do that. Otherwise, it is a very fancy tuner bolted into an unmodified CTC-74 chassis. So that is a pretty interesting thing. The remote on these things is a very large and clunky device. Here is the remote for it. It's designed to sit on your table. RCA put a heavy rubber bumper on the edge. And the reason for doing that was that the set has absolutely no controls on it in the way of channel, volume, or on-off. The only controls are on the remote. In fact, I will show this when I get up close to it. You can see that right here is a door. There's the little microphone, because this is an ultrasonic remote. In fact, I'll show that. You can see the little transducer in here. And you think, well, in that case, there must be a power switch in here. This here is a little photodiode, which is used, or photoresistor, which is used for an automatic brightness control, which compensates for the ambient light of the room. But in here is not a power switch. There is a master power switch, which kills power to the entire set, to where you no longer have the remote chassis, also known as the direct address programmer, or DAP module, active, as well as switches for auto color, AFT, automatic fine-tuning, contrast, brightness, and the clock set function, which I'll show later, and then the fine-tuning for the various channels, the VHF channels, as well as I think a few UHF. I'm not sure. I think those might be automatically tuned. I don't have anything on UHF for this set to use. So what I'll do here is I'll show how this works. When you want to turn on the set, you just key in the channel that you want. See, there's no on or off button on this remote. In fact, I'll flip the reverse side because it shows some of the instructions for the TV, for the remote actually. So what you do is, considering I have the output of my Roku dumped into a VCR to use it as an RF modulator, it is then outputting on VHF channel 4. So what I'll do is I will press, it's a 2-button code, it always will be on this. So you press 0, 4, and it is now on channel 4. Now this set has a picture tube that is in relatively good shape, and it also displays the time and whatever channel you've input on screen for, I believe, about 5 seconds. Or if you flip a switch on the back, which was only 1976, 1977 models, they eliminated the switch, it would leave the on-screen display on at all times. They eliminated it due to a lot of warranty work due to picture tubes that had the time and channel numbers burnt into them. This is presently displaying nothing. However, when I press play on my Roku remote, you will see that I have something kind of suitable for this television set, being that it's an RCA. To adjust tint or color, you press each button here. Tint will light up the on-screen display green, and you use the volume up-down buttons to change the tint. Oops, I waited too long, and then the volume adjusted. Color is on the left, and it lights up the on-screen display in red. Now, that promotional put out for NBC in 1978 is kind of a historically significant one. The head of NBC at the time was a man named Fred Silverman, who I believe died just a little bit earlier this year. And, of course, at this point in time, NBC was owned by RCA, who made this television set. Of course, what is now known as 30 Rock, or the Comcast building, or formerly the GE building in Manhattan, was at that point in time the RCA building, and it's still the headquarters for NBC to this day. That promotional was put out during a period of time when all of Silverman's shows that he proposed and got in there, he was the head of NBC at the time, head writer and as such, were massive failures, and the staff of NBC was not particularly impressed with the shows themselves. While this promotional was meant to put out a positive image, the shows that it was promoting in many cases were absolute disasters. One, for example, featured a couple of Korean pop stars who had a talk show, but they couldn't speak English. And this was meant for the American market. And it was supposed to have on various performers of the day. They had to pay heavily and use some of the coercive efforts of the RCA record label to get anybody to appear on the show. The show was a massive failure, and this was just the tip of the iceberg. At that point in time, various employees at NBC sent an alternative script to the same promotional that I just played, to the same production company, it is rumored. And the script was rather amusing, and it eventually circulated throughout NBC so much that Don Imus played it on the air on WNBC New York. I will cue that up and play that in just one moment. Here queued up is the parody version that was sent off to the same production company. Overlaid, it was originally just an audio tape, overlaid onto one of the official promotionals of the day.
We're loud, say it again, NBC, we're loud, we're in last place, loud, we're gonna fall right on our face, loud, since Freddie came, our ratings always stayed the same, an 18 rating, a 14 share, bet you wonder if we care, no, we're just proud to be NBC, we're loud, we're living in the past, loud, about a drop and out real loud, about 40 shows, just watch us jam them up your nose, we don't care, it's all fair, NBC is always there, we're not just proud, we're also loud, we're louder than the rest, so loud, it doesn't matter, we're not the best, loud, we're gonna screw around and run this network in the ground, the peacock said, so thank you, Fred, yeah, thanks a whole lot, NBC proud as a peacock.
Well, to show off one final thing with this, since I turned the set on by by keying in a channel number, I figure out how to show how other channels would be changed. For example, I'll key in 56. That has nothing on it presently, but it gives you an idea of what happens. And I'll put it back to the channel that it was on, 04. And as I said, it always has to be a two-digit code. And to turn the set off, you may be wondering, well, how do you do that if there's no on-off button? Well, you just key in 0, 0. And it has that wonderful color spot, because this set, despite being as late as it is from 1976, it does not have a spot kill circuit. The same set was produced for a few years later and badged as a color track, despite the fact that there were no modifications done other than the removal of the light, not the light sense switch. They did remove the light sense switch as well as the switch for the on-screen display, and made it to where it always shut off. They just wired that logic out of it and did not allow that to be a customer usable one. One other thing of note before I conclude the video is that this television set, when it was new in 1976, cost $800. And this is only a 19-inch tabletop television. One could buy a rather, a nice 25-inch console set for the same price, but it wouldn't have this fancy remote control. This whole system here, which was very complicated, I might add, it fills up the entire right side of the set where the picture tube isn't, all the way to the back. It is quite an engineering marvel for being as early as it is, and working with an ultrasonic remote to have that much functionality built in. So it was a very expensive TV in its day, and these are very rare, especially in the 19-inch tabletop version, which this is, because nobody would have thought, in many cases, that it was a good idea to spend as much money on a tabletop television set when you could get a set that was much larger, as well as in a nice cabinet for the same amount of money. One other thing before I conclude the video. When I first got this set, it had a rather erratic display on it, which turned out to be all of the electrolytic capacitors, but I think 2 of them in the direct address programmer module had dried up. They didn't register even at all on my ESR meter. And after a week or so of using the set, there's a large oil-filled AC capacitor, I believe a 3.5 microfarad, that goes across the secondary of the power transformer. And this is a power transformer set. This is not series. Well, of course it wouldn't be series because there are no tubes, but it's not AC line operated in the way that everything is referenced to the neutral side of the line. That capacitor shorted, and I was unable to find a metal can in the same size or at all in that value, as well as the high voltage that it was rated for. And as such, I found a Mylar capacitor that had the nice screw mount as well that I could put up onto the chassis and slide right in there. You know, it's not exactly a US-made part, it's some China junk, but it appears to work. I mean, you really can't screw up too hard on a Mylar capacitor. And it's held up for the last few months that I've owned the set. As well as about a month after I got it, these sets turn on the main TV section from the DAP section, Direct Address Program, or DAP, using a triac instead of a relay. There's a tiny reed relay, sort of a micro switch, electronically controlled, that actually turns on the triac, but the rest of it is switched to the triac. And having that like that means that it's very susceptible to power surges. Definitely wasn't the most thought out things in existence. A friend of mine who was a TV repairman in Atlanta, some of you may know who I'm talking about, said that on many of these things, due to repeat failures, he would modify the circuits and wire in a relay instead. I myself just replaced the triac. It was much easier to do so. They're mounted to a nice heat sink, and then you can just solder the wires to them. It's not very difficult to repair. The biggest challenge with working on these is removing about 15 or so different connections and cables that go onto the DAP chassis. And then you have the task of undoing the DAP chassis itself. It's multiple boards all sandwiched together. Some of them are modular, some of them are just bolted on with cables running between them. It's quite a mess of wires.